Imagine you're in a barren land where desert dust blankets everything and the sun seems relentless. You're a cowboy hardened by life's adversities. You've braved storms, hunted outlaws, and survived the unforgiving rules of the Wild West. But what if one day you had to break every rule you've ever followed? What could be powerful enough to make a man like you act so boldly? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you. It all began when John Cooper, a cowboy known for his skill with a revolver and his rigid posture, saw something he never imagined he would see. A native child, alone, lost, her eyes filled with fear. She was Cheyenne, a girl about to become a statistic in a war that wasn't hers, a war that had already taken everything from her tribe. But John didn't know that yet. What he did know, on that warm, silent morning, was that something inside him was stirring, as if destiny were calling him to make a decision that would change everything. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt like you had to do something, even though you knew the consequences could be dire? John didn't know what was coming, but he felt deep down that he had to act. Something bigger than himself was pushing him to break everything he'd ever believed was right. He looked at Cheyenne, a child with the eyes of someone who'd seen too much pain, and in that moment, something in his chest tightened. He could have simply moved on, ignoring the situation and letting others make the decisions. But that wasn't what happened. Instead of continuing on his way and leaving the native girl behind, John did something unthinkable. He made a bold decision, one that defied all the conventions of the Old West, where survival and strength were the only ones that mattered. He decided to fight to save that innocent life. But why would he do this? Why would he break all the rules that had defined him for years? What would you do in such a situation? Would you continue your journey, ignoring what lay before you, or would you take a step that could risk everything? John knew that by making that decision, he was not only putting his life at risk, but also challenging the Western system itself. And that's where the real story begins. A story of courage, compassion, and unexpected choices that can change destinies. Stay with me, because what follows will take you on an exciting journey full of surprises. John and Cheyenne's journey is about to begin, and you won't want to miss what happens next. And what happened to John Cooper and the Cheyenne girl? You'll find out soon enough. As John became more and more immersed in this journey, he knew he couldn't give up. With each step, he felt his life changing forever, that Cheyenne's presence gave him a stronger reason than anything else to fight. It wasn't just about him anymore, but about someone who needed protection, someone who truly cared, and he became that person. Have you ever felt like your life was about to change because of a bold decision? Or that something or someone appeared at just the right moment to make you see the world differently? John and Cheyenne were about to cross a line of no return, where choices would become more than just a reflex of instinct, but a profound response to what is right. I'd like to invite you to reflect a little on what we've been talking about so far. Have you ever thought about how small decisions can change destinies? And how, in a world where we often go with the flow, it takes courage to do what really matters? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So leave a comment here and tell me, what would you do if you were in John's shoes? How do you deal with life's difficult choices? Your experience is valuable, and sharing it can be key to helping others reflect as well. Also, if you're enjoying this story and this type of content, please like the video. This helps me understand that you want to see more stories like this with emotion, action, and truth. Your like not only strengthens the channel, but gives us the energy we need to continue bringing you this type of content that truly touches people. And if you haven't subscribed yet, take advantage of it now. Subscribing to the channel is a way to be part of something bigger, to follow stories that inspire you and have the power to transform. The more people who subscribe, the more we can expand this community that believes that courage, compassion, and changing destiny truly make a difference in the world. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this kind of content. Without it, none of this would have the same impact. I'm so grateful for being part of this journey, and I'm certain that together we can continue to share these heartwarming stories that remind us that, in the end, it's our choices that define who we are. Now, let's continue this story, because the best is yet to come. John Cooper was a feared and respected name in the Old West. Known for his unrivaled skill with a revolver and his relentless stance, he was not someone to be trifled with. His hands, which seemed shaped by the desert itself, were quick and sure. He was the kind of man who would pass through the saloon unnoticed, but when he looked someone in the eye, he knew exactly what they were thinking. The Wild West was a place where the fittest survive, and John knew this better than anyone. He had his own code, and he followed it to the letter. Survive, hunt, protect his honor. There was no room for weakness in his life, but what no one knew about him, what the desert and the roar of guns didn't reveal, was that behind that tough facade lay a different man. John was more than a cowboy. He was someone who had been shaped by life in ways few could understand. Inside, he carried a silent pain, a longing for something he had never truly experienced, genuine compassion. His life had been a long series of battles, both internal and external, and he believed the desert was the only place he could hide from this hidden truth. What no one expected, and not even he knew, was that an unexpected situation would make him question everything. The arrival of Cheyenne, a native child, would represent the beginning of a journey that would challenge him in ways he never imagined. Until that moment, John had been guided by the simple logic of a cowboy. The strongest wins, the fastest survives, and loyalty is repaid with loyalty. But now he was being thrust into uncharted territory, where clear rules existed. There, he would not just be Iron Fist Cooper, but a man faced with a choice that would test his very essence. John had no intention of getting involved with the Native Americans. His world lay in the vast plains, in solitary hunts and in lonely nights by the fire. He had no time to dwell on political disputes or land issues, but something in those deep-set Cheyenne eyes made him see the world differently. The desert, which had always been his ally and refuge, now seemed the emptiest place of all, and he knew he couldn't ignore what lay before him. In a way, Cheyenne made him realize that true strength lay not only in knowing how to fight, but also in knowing when to risk oneself to protect someone he hadn't even met until that moment. The cowboy Iron Fist was about to discover that his greatest battle wouldn't be against outsiders or hunters, but against his own resistance to change. He didn't know it, but that encounter with Cheyenne was about to transform his thinking about courage, what truly mattered in life, and the true meaning of protection. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what John faced and what he had to decide is something we can all learn from. The truth is, the journeys that matter most in life aren't the ones we follow without question. They aren't the easy paths or the trails we already know well. These are the moments when we are challenged to step out of our comfort zone, to risk what we value most, all for something beyond ourselves. Cheyenne was only 8 years old, but her gaze held a wisdom that only pain could teach. She wasn't just a child. She was the last hope of a tribe whose days were numbered. Her tribe, the Wichitas, was being pushed to the brink as ranching and land expansion took over the region. Old traditions, stories passed down from generation to generation, were disappearing. Cheyenne didn't know it, of course, but she felt in her soul that the world around her was changing irreversibly. That day she lay on the ground, dirty and barefoot, amidst a scene of destruction that had never been part of her childhood. The scene was brutal and sad, and yet she did not cry. She was a strong girl already marked by suffering. She was the daughter of warrior parents, but circumstances were stronger than any bravery. The girl knew that, without the protection of her own, she was alone. Alone. In a world where no one seemed to hear the voice of a child. The stories her mother told about the future of her people were fading, and Cheyenne was the last one left to carry that burden. Who, deep down, would listen to the voice of an 8-year-old girl in a world dominated by harsh men, without compassion, and with no time for feelings? In a time where survival was everything, where the fight for land and human rights was a matter of life and death, Cheyenne was nothing more than another statistic, another name erased from history. Or at least that's how it seemed. No one saw her as someone who could change the narrative. She was too small to be seen, and it was in that moment, amidst all that seemed lost, that John Cooper found her. To him, Cheyenne was just another victim of the conflicts ravaging the West, but fate, as he would soon discover, has a way of transforming the most unlikely of encounters into something far greater than anyone could have anticipated. When John saw the girl, he saw not just a native child, but the symbol of a struggle he himself hadn't known existed within. He realized that something much deeper was at play in that encounter. He didn't know exactly what, but something about Cheyenne made the weight of his own journey disappear for a moment. Now I want to delve even deeper into this, because what John felt when he looked at Cheyenne wasn't just compassion, it was a revelation, a glimpse of the hidden truth that lurked behind the girl's eyes. He began to understand that no matter how much the world seemed to care, he had the power to change her story. He could be the person who made a difference, and in that moment, he knew he couldn't move forward without giving everything he had to save that life. The impact Cheyenne had on him was stronger than any bullet or fight he had faced before. It made him question his cowboy mentality, his relentless stance, and everything he believed to be unshakable. John was about to embark on a journey that would challenge not only his survival skills, but also his deepest beliefs. He was beginning to understand that sometimes saving someone means facing one's own weaknesses and fighting against a cruel and unforgiving system. I keep thinking, have you ever had a moment when you were faced with something so big, so important, that it made you reconsider your choices and the direction your life was taking? Something that made you realize there was a greater responsibility than you imagined. I think that's how John felt in that moment with Cheyenne, as if life, with all its difficulties and dilemmas, had led him there to face the true essence of courage. The sun was low on the horizon, tinging the sky a golden hue that couldn't hide the tension in the air. The hot desert wind carried with it the smell of dust and the promise of an imminent battle. John stood, watching from a distance, his heart pounding faster than he cared to admit. What he knew in that moment was simple yet devastating. Cheyenne, the native girl, had been captured by a group of outsiders, and not just any group. These were cruel men, accustomed to raiding tribes and taking hostages, men without any compassion or regard for human life. John had seen many horrors in his life, but nothing like this. The sight of Cheyenne now in the hands of these men was unbearable. He knew that if nothing was done, the girl would be handed over to her worst enemies, those who would not hesitate to destroy everything she represented, and perhaps even her life. He also knew the situation was beyond negotiation. These outsiders were not there to listen, but to dominate. And Cheyenne, so small and vulnerable, was merely a pawn in a game she never chose to play. John's mind was on fire, torn between what he had always known was right and what his heart now demanded of him. The cowboy who had ridden the West coldly and ruthlessly, who had never wavered in the face of an enemy, now found himself faced with a moral dilemma that challenged everything he believed in. His survival instinct screamed at him to move on, to ignore what was happening, to return to the safety of his solitary life. But something inside him, something much deeper, wouldn't allow him to simply turn away. For a moment he stood still, watching, feeling the weight of each decision. But then, without further hesitation, he made the decision that would change everything. He would no longer be an ordinary cowboy, no longer just John Iron Fist Cooper, the unbeatable man, but someone willing to risk everything he had achieved thus far. He didn't know if he could save Cheyenne, nor did he know the cost of his intervention, but there was something greater at stake. That child's life and the chance to change the course of a history marked by pain. He reined in his horse with determination, his eyes fixed on the group of strangers. His body was ready for combat, but his mind was elsewhere, in a place where the usual rules no longer applied. He knew that by acting he was breaking a code of honor that had defined him for so long, but at the same time, he felt it liberating him. It was no longer about him, no longer about being the unbeatable cowboy. It was about Cheyenne, and about doing what, deep down, he knew was right. The tension in the air was palpable, and the silence before the action seemed louder than any noise of confrontation that would follow. John knew that in making this decision, he wasn't just facing the outsiders, but a version of himself, a part of himself he'd never imagined existed. He was being tested in a way he'd never been. In a world where physical strength and decisiveness ruled, he now faced a test of character, and the battle wouldn't be won by brute force alone. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what John faced wasn't just a confrontation with outsiders, but with the very idea of what it means to be a hero. He wasn't seeking glory or recognition, but rather what lurks between the lines of our choices. What makes us do what's right even when everything inside us screams the opposite? And that's precisely where true transformation happens. It's not when we follow the beaten path, but when we make a courageous decision, at a moment when all seems lost. John Cooper now had more than a mission. He had a new reason to fight. He was fighting for something much bigger than himself, and that made all the difference. He didn't know how it would all end, but something in his heart told him that by doing what seemed impossible, he was not only changing Cheyenne's destiny, but perhaps his own as well. Night fell quickly over the desert, bringing with it a chill that seemed to cut to the bone. The sky was clear, but the darkness seemed denser than usual, as if the world itself had gone silent in anticipation of what was about to happen. John Cooper, mounted on his horse, scanned the horizon, his senses heightened, as he always did before entering any dangerous situation. But something was different about this night. He wasn't hunting bandits or tracking outsiders. What he faced now couldn't be combated with his skill with a revolver or his strength. It was something more subtle, more profound. It was at that moment, as he approached the clearing, that he saw her for the first time. Cheyenne, the native girl who seemed so small and fragile against the vastness of the desert, was there, sitting on a rock, her eyes fixed on the fire. She wasn't crying or screaming, but something in her gaze conveyed a deep anguish, something beyond John's comprehension at that moment. He watched her from afar, realizing that she, like him, was a survivor. But while John knew exactly what life demanded of him, Cheyenne seemed lost, like a fragile flame struggling to stay awake in the icy wind. John had never cared much for children. They were just part of a world he saw as too fragile to be real. In his mind, the desert left no room for innocence. But in that moment, as he looked at Cheyenne, he saw something that made him question everything he knew about life in the West. Something in him broke. He saw not just a child, but a soul marked by pain and fear, a strong yet fragile spirit cast into an unforgiving world. He sensed that in that gaze there was more than suffering. There was a flame that refused to be extinguished. The pain Cheyenne carried seemed so intense that John could almost feel it on his own skin. But it wasn't just the pain that touched him. There was something more. She wasn't just at the mercy of her enemies. She was, in a way, waiting for someone who, against all odds, could change her fate. And in that moment, as if a revelation had dawned on him, John knew that someone was him. The hardened cowboy, accustomed to making quick, cold-blooded decisions, now found himself standing, unsure of what to do, before a child who needed something he, until then, had never known. How to offer true protection, the steady hand of someone who cared about more than their own survival. He felt the weight of that responsibility. Something inside him shifted there, in the silence of that cold night. And as he faced Cheyenne, he knew he could no longer continue as before. He had embarked on a path that would take him on a journey far beyond mere survival. Now, he needed to be more than a cowboy. He needed to be someone willing to change, someone willing to fight for a life other than his own. John's mind was still full of questions. He had never cared about anyone but himself, but now he couldn't help but wonder, what if he could change Cheyenne's life? What she represented to him wasn't just a lost child, but a reflection of everything he himself could have been or could become. In a world where the fittest survive, he faced a decision that required more than strength. It required courage. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because what John felt that night is something we can all relate to at some point in our lives. We've all encountered a situation where we were forced to look beyond our own pain and see something bigger, something that demanded our action. What happened that night wasn't just a cowboy and a kid meeting. It was the moment John Cooper began to realize that true strength isn't just in fighting, but in choosing to do what's right, even when everything around you tells you otherwise. John stood there, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching Cheyenne with the same attention as a hunter preparing an ambush. But this time, he wasn't hunting bandits or outsiders. He was facing a decision that would confront everything he'd ever believed, a dilemma that would challenge the very essence of what it means to be a cowboy in the Old West. He knew what was at stake. The decision he made now could change everything. He had been trained to follow a code of conduct, a set of rules that guaranteed his survival, respect, and power. The code said that the strongest wins, that those who don't adapt perish, that solidarity is a weakness, and that if you can't defend your territory, you don't deserve to survive. But this situation was different. This wasn't a confrontation with other men, it was a fight for a child's life. And there John found himself faced with an impossible choice. Saving Cheyenne meant breaking every rule he knew. It meant risking his own life, defying hunters and even soldiers who were vying for control. It meant going against everything he thought he knew about the Wild West and his own strength. He knew that by making this decision, he would not only be defying the customs of his own existence, but also defying the idea that the strongest are the ones who deserve life. Contrary to all the teachings that had shaped him, he now needed to act with compassion, with his heart. And this, for John, was a vulnerability he had never known how to acknowledge, much less demonstrate. Deep down, he felt this wasn't just about Cheyenne, but about himself, about his own transformation. He was challenging the system that had made him who he was up until that moment. He knew that by saving that girl, he wasn't just breaking the rules, but also shattering a part of himself, the part that believed only the strongest deserved to live. And there, amidst everything he'd been, he finally saw the hidden truth. Perhaps true strength wasn't about being the most unbeatable or the most ruthless, but about choosing to protect and fight for something more valuable than one's own survival. John was ready to make a decision that would change the course of his life. He knew there was no going back from this choice. No matter what he faced, whether it was the weight of the hunters, the confrontation with other men, or the fear of his own vulnerability, none of it mattered more than saving Cheyenne, than rescuing that child from a cruel fate. He felt that by acting courageously, he was rescuing not only her life, but also his own humanity. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because John's decision brings us to a crucial point we all face at some point in our lives. We all, at some point, must confront our own beliefs and challenges and choose between what is easy and what is right. In John's case, he was breaking the rules, but in doing so, he was actually freeing himself from a system that imprisoned him. He was choosing something greater, something that reflected true strength of character, the courage to do what is right, even when it means facing immeasurable adversity. I ask you now, have you ever had to break rules in your life to do what's right? Have you ever faced your own beliefs or resistance to make a difficult but necessary decision? John's journey of transformation and courage can teach you something very valuable about the inner strength we all possess. John and Cheyenne's journey began desperately. After making the decision to break all the rules, he knew there was no turning back. There was no more room for hesitation. Cheyenne's life was in his hands, and he couldn't let fear or circumstances paralyze him. As he gathered her in his arms, the sense of urgency became palpable. Escape was their only option. Their enemies were after them and time was against them. As they mounted their horses and rode through the desert, the scorching heat of the day began to merge with the tension in the air. The silence between them was heavy but not uncomfortable. Cheyenne, still scared but with a glimmer of hope in her eyes, looked at John as if he were the only thing standing between her and the end. He knew she trusted him now, and this was something new for him, something that challenged him to be more than the hardened cowboy he'd always been. Every step, every movement was a reminder that he now had a responsibility, and that this child's life depended on him. They crossed turbulent rivers where the waters nearly swallowed their horses. But for some reason, something inside John compelled him to keep going, as if a greater force were guiding him. Every obstacle seemed there to test them, to measure their courage and determination. And though exhaustion threatened to become unbearable, they didn't stop. With every mile covered, every step taken, John felt a deeper connection with Cheyenne. It was as if they were entwined in a journey that transcended what he imagined possible. The desert seemed endless, but so were the threats. The outsiders who had attacked the Cheyenne tribe were just steps behind, determined not to let her escape. To them, she was not just a child, but an important piece in a much larger game. And what John knew was that the further they got, the more dangerous their enemies would become. The bandits were relentless, and the fact that John was now breaking his own rules of survival made the situation even riskier. The two faced freezing nights where the wind cut like blades and relentless days under the scorching sun. But even with the pressure mounting and the enemies closing in, something in John wouldn't let him give up. With each night they spent together, Cheyenne seemed to trust him more, and he sensed the child had more strength than he could have imagined. She lacked the tools of a warrior, but her spirit was unbreakable. She, like him, would not give up. And this strength she demonstrated fueled him, driving him forward, despite the risks and fear. But with each step, the question grew more insistent. Could they escape the clutches of their enemies? Would John's decision to break the rules and risk everything to save that child truly lead them to freedom? He didn't know. What he did know was that fate seemed to guide them, as if the winding roads and challenges they faced were tests of their courage, of their own transformation. And it was in that tense moment, as they trudged through the arid terrain, that John realized their escape wasn't just an attempt to escape. It was a journey toward freedom, toward redemption, both for Cheyenne and for himself. He knew that by protecting this girl, he was breaking free from his former self, from the limits he had imposed on himself. He was, in a way, creating a new destiny for both of them, and this brought with it a sense of power he had never experienced. But it also frightened him, because he knew there was no way to predict what would happen next. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because John and Cheyenne's journey of escape reveals something powerful about how we are challenged to go beyond our own limits. As in our own lives, we are often pushed to leave our comfort zone, to make decisions that, at first glance, seem impossible, but which deep down are exactly what we need to transform ourselves and achieve something greater. And, like John and Cheyenne, we all face the dilemma of facing the unknown, of choosing to move forward, even when everything around us tells us to give up. The final battle was about to begin. The hot, dry wind sliced through the desert as John and Cheyenne finally found themselves confronted by the outlaws. They had done their best to escape, hiding, moving in the shadows, but like everything in the Old West, the tracks they left behind were inescapable. The outlaws had finally caught up with them, and the stage was set for an inevitable confrontation. John Cooper, with his experience as a hunter and a man of war, knew what to do. The man known for his skill with weapons now found himself facing a much more difficult fight. He was fighting not only for his own life, but for that of a child he hadn't even met until a few days ago. Now, Cheyenne was all that mattered. She was the symbol of his transformation, the reflection of a decision he never imagined making, and if necessary, he would go to any lengths to protect that life. The outsiders, unscrupulous men, weren't there to negotiate. They were after a native child, a trophy for their ruthless victories. John knew that if they fell into their hands, Cheyenne wouldn't stand a chance. She would be just another victim of a cruel and merciless system. No, he couldn't allow that, not after everything they had been through together. He looked at the girl, his eyes fixed on her, and something in his chest quieted. He knew what he had to do. The fight began quickly and fiercely. The strangers attacked immediately, their pistols firing at the pair. But John, with a calm that only years of experience in the West could instill, reacted with the precision of a man who had faced death at close quarters and never allowed himself to be intimidated. He drew his weapon with the agility that made him legendary and began returning fire. Every movement was calculated, every bullet fired with the certainty that the Cheyenne's survival depended on the precision of his actions. But the battle was not easy. There were too many against him, and time seemed to be running out. As John faced the outsiders, Cheyenne, though frightened, was far from a passive spectator. She knew John was fighting for her, but she also knew that if she didn't help, there would be no more chances. She watched the fighting, trying to find a way to contribute, even if silently. There was something powerful in her gaze, a quiet force that, though small, was present. She was no longer just under John's protection. She was becoming part of the fight. Her every gesture seemed to reinforce John's resolve not to give up, not to let the darkness of the West swallow them. The exchange of gunfire between John and the bandits seemed endless. John's every move was a dance of survival, a clash between experience and the brute fury of the outsiders. John felt the pressure of every second. The fight was about to reach its climax, and although he knew he held a strategic advantage, the reality was that the enemy outnumbered him. Doubt began to creep into John's mind. Would this be his last fight? He had faced so many challenges before, but this one felt different. Now he was fighting not only for his own life, but for the future of an innocent child. The battle's outcome was near. The weary outsiders were beginning to waver. John had the advantage now. His shots were more accurate, his stance firmer, as if each bullet were an extension of his own will to live and protect Cheyenne. He knew that, despite everything, there was a strength within him he had never experienced before. He was no longer the desert-hardened cowboy. He was someone transformed by his choices and by Cheyenne's life. And with one last swift, decisive move, he did what seemed impossible. He defeated the outsiders. The battle was finally won, but the price of victory had been high. John, his heart racing, still felt the weight of the struggle on his shoulders. He turned to Cheyenne, who was standing still, but now with a look of relief. She was no longer just a victim or a lost girl. She was a survivor, a warrior in her own right. And like John, she had been transformed by everything they had faced together. Now I want to delve even deeper into this, because John's fight wasn't just against the outsiders, but against the version of himself he was leaving behind. Every shot fired wasn't just a defensive move, but a declaration that he was ready to be someone different, someone who would choose to fight for what was right, even in the most desperate situations. And that, more than any, battle was the true transformation. When the dust finally settled, and the last echoes of the gunfire faded into the hot desert wind, John stood there, exhausted, but victorious. The silence that followed was immense, almost as heavy as the weight of the fight itself. He looked at Cheyenne, who stood there beside him, her eyes fixed on him. She, who had been a frightened and hopeless child, was now here, alive, free. John felt a sensation he couldn't explain. It wasn't just the satisfaction of victory, but something much deeper. He knew that what he had done was not just an act of courage, but a gesture of transformation. He had changed not only that child's destiny, but his own. With blood, sweat, and tears, John managed to save Cheyenne. Every step of that journey, every moment of doubt and fear, now became a story that would be told for generations. But the most significant thing wasn't just that he defeated his enemies and ensured Cheyenne's safety. What truly marked the legacy of that battle was what John had learned along the way. He broke the rules. He challenged his own code. And in doing so, he discovered something he never imagined: that true strength comes not from brutality or skill with weapons, but from the courage to rebel against what is expected of you. John was no longer just the desert-hardened cowboy. He was no longer the man who followed the rules of the West, where survival depended on strength, toughness, and a lack of empathy. He had become something greater, something more meaningful. He had found a new code, a moral code that transcended the simple struggle for survival. He was now fighting for something worthwhile, something that could truly change someone's life. He was fighting for Cheyenne, for their future, and in a way for his own. And that was the true transformation. John Cooper, the man who had traversed the West blind to anything but survival, now found himself with renewed purpose. He had discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act even when fear is immense. He had faced the worst, and in doing so, discovered the power to protect and give someone a chance at a different life. He was, in some way, healing the wound the desert had left in his own heart by offering the Cheyenne something he himself might never have received: care, protection, and the hope of a new beginning. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because John's story isn't just about a physical battle, but an internal struggle. All of us, at some point in our lives, face a moment when we must decide who we want to be, what we're willing to do to transform our lives or someone else's. John, on his journey, went from a man marked by violence and the rules of the West to someone who acted with compassion and courage, something he never imagined himself capable of. The question remains, who are we really when we're willing to break the rules, defy what's expected of us, and fight for what truly matters? This is the real question behind the story of John Cooper and Cheyenne, the impact courage has on our lives, and how it can transform not only our own destiny, but also that of those who cross our path. And I ask you, what would you do if you were faced with a decision that challenged everything you ever believed to be right? What is your code, and how far would you be willing to go to change the course of your own story? When we look at John and Cheyenne's journey, we see that what began as a simple decision to save a life turned into something much bigger. Their story isn't just about a cowboy facing off against outsiders. It's not just about shooting and running through the desert. It's about a journey of transformation, courage, and above all, difficult choices. What became clear to John along this path was that sometimes the rules we follow aren't enough to ensure we're doing the right thing. Sometimes, to change a life's destiny, we must be willing to break those rules and challenge the system. John didn't know what he would find when he embarked on this journey with Cheyenne. He only knew that by engaging with her, his life would never be the same. And, as difficult as it was, he made the decision to go against everything he believed to be right. He was defying the conventions of the Old West, where survival was based on a code of strength, dominance, and brutality. He knew that by saving that girl, he was risking his own life. But more than that, he was challenging his own beliefs about what was necessary to survive. John went beyond the fight for survival. He did what he felt was right, and that required courage, even greater than any physical confrontation. Have you ever stopped to think about this? Have you ever wondered what you would do if you had the chance to change someone's destiny? Perhaps you've faced difficult choices in your own life, moments when the right course of action wasn't the easiest or safest. John and Cheyenne's story teaches us that when someone's life is at stake, sometimes it's necessary to break the rules, challenge the mindset imposed on us, and act in defense of what truly matters. And make no mistake, this decision may be the hardest you've ever faced, but it can also be the most transformative. This reflection isn't just about what John did for Cheyenne. It's an invitation for all of us to rethink our own decisions and the way we choose to act in the world. Are we acting according to our true beliefs? Or are we simply following a path because it's the easiest, the most comfortable? The real challenge, the true transformation, comes when we are willing to act based on what is right, not what is convenient. And like John, we can all be faced with these moments when our courage is tested. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because true greatness comes not from external victories, but from the internal battles we face. We all have those moments when we must decide who we want to be and what legacy we want to leave. John made a choice that changed Cheyenne's life, but also transformed his own. He didn't just save a life, he saved himself from being a prisoner of a code of conduct that deep down he knew didn't represent his true essence. True greatness, as he discovered, lies in the courage to do what's right, even when it means breaking the rules. If you've made it this far, it's because something in John and Cheyenne's story touched you, just as it did me. It's not every day that we come across such a powerful example of courage and transformation, and that's why I think you'll want to keep following more stories like this. If this content made you reflect or touch something deep inside you, leave me a like to show that this connection was worth it. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take advantage now. Here, we share stories that can change the way we see the world, and if you stuck around until the end, you'll certainly be moved by what's to come. Now tell me something. What would you do if you had the chance to change someone's destiny just like John did? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear how you view this kind of decision. Oh, and there's another story right here that will make you emotional too. Click there and stay with me there. I'm sure it'll be an incredible journey.